Welcome to Fed Listens with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City from the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City. Fed Governor Lael Brainard and President and CEO of Kansas City Fed, Esther George, joins Oklahoma tribal leaders to hear about how Native American economies are recovering from the pandemic. Here's Esther George.
Hello and welcome to the First Americans Museum for today's Fed Listens session with Governor Lael Brainard. And my thanks to each of the tribal nation leaders who join us today. Before I turn to Governor Brainard for her opening comments, I want to offer some context for today's conversation. The Federal Reserve has important public responsibilities for our nation's financial and economic stability. We're a supervisor and regulator of banks. We seek to ensure the smooth functioning of our nation's payment system. And of course, we have responsibility for conducting monetary policy. To effectively serve a nation as large and diverse as ours across this mission, Congress recognized that the Federal Reserve would need to be engaged with the communities and the public it serves. Our structure, with a Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., and 12 Federal Reserve banks headquartered across the country, was designed in part to ensure broad public involvement. And here I would note the particular influence of a former Oklahoma Senator, Robert Owen, who was a member of the Cherokee Nation and Oklahoma's first U.S. Senator. He chaired the Senate Banking Committee in 1913 and was an influential architect of the Federal Reserve's decentralized structure. At the Kansas City Fed and our branch offices in Denver, Oklahoma City, and Omaha, we meet regularly with community and business leaders across the 10th Federal Reserve District to give us insight on current and developing economic and financial conditions. Individuals from business, banking, agriculture, energy, labor, and community organizations, including those from Native American tribes, serve on our boards of directors. They participate on advisory councils and share their views in roundtables and events such as the one that brings us together today. As this region's representative to the Federal Open Market Committee, the input I receive through these various channels is an important element in shaping my own policy views. Today's dialogue is one in a series of events hosted by the Federal Reserve in settings across the country called Fed Listens. This year, the focus of these conversations is on the economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and hearing from a broad range of stakeholders informs our understanding of the pace of the recovery, its uneven effects, and the future of the new normal. Our participants today each lead one of Oklahoma's 39 federally recognized Native American tribes who, along with other tribal nations, were, of course, the first Americans. And we're glad to host this event in this beautiful new First Americans Museum here in Oklahoma City. I've greatly valued past interactions with a number of you who are participating today, and I look forward to hearing the perspective of each nation represented as the Fed seeks to better understand the current economic environment in your communities. And so, Governor Brainard, thank you for being here today, and I will turn it to you for your comments.
Well, it's great to be here. I want to join Esther George in expressing my appreciation to the leaders of tribal nations for this opportunity to learn from you and to listen to you as part of our Fed Listens series. I want to thank Governor Untitled for hosting us, and I'm really excited to be here at the First Americans Museum. Just as the museum is highlighting the cultural diversity, the history, the resilience of the 39 Native nations of Oklahoma, I wanted to talk a little bit about the important economic contributions Native American communities are making despite daunting impediments that were exacerbated by the pandemic. Tribal nations have long been a critical source of economic opportunity and stability for the U.S. economy overall. Tribal nations account for over 1 million employment. That certainly was the case prior to the pandemic. And here in Oklahoma, when comparing the economic activity of the tribes to other industries, tribal nations account for so much activity that they would rank 9th in output and 11th in employment. The resilience of Native communities was evident in the strong response of tribal nations to the pandemic. I think much has been written about that. But the pandemic's economic damage clearly exacerbated longstanding disparities faced by Native communities. Still, the employment to population ratio is well below that for the nation overall. And of course, the pandemic led to significant declines in revenues of both tribal governments and businesses at a time when their activities and their services were more important than ever. In working to address those persistent disparities, we certainly focus on key impediments for financial access. And those, for many tribal communities, range for impediments to banking, to mortgage financing, to small business credit, and to financial education. Perhaps most fundamentally, access to banking services has been proven to be very important to ensure the financial well-being of both individuals and the communities where they live. Yet over 16% of American Indians and Alaska Natives were unbanked in the last year in which the data were collected. That's 3 times higher than for the population overall. And those low levels, to a large degree, reflect the lack of proximity and the low penetration of bank branches into many tribal communities. There are also daunting barriers to home ownership. Those range from inadequate supply to lack of credit readiness. And tribal members sometimes have trouble obtaining home loans, especially for properties located on trust land due to the complexity in using trust property as collateral. Overcoming these challenges to expand home ownership options are very but also because of the jobs and local activity and skill building that entails. Native small businesses also face special challenges in obtaining credit. Around 300,000 Native American-owned small businesses and enterprises generate around $50 billion of revenue. But those small businesses struggle to access bank credit, and we can see that by the much higher percentage of small businesses that were started using bank credit outside of Native communities relative to bank communities, and also the much higher reliance on credit card for financing on small businesses in Native communities relative to the population overall. And of course, we also, perhaps reflecting those weaker ties to banks, saw that small businesses in tribal areas were both less likely to receive PPP assistance and received less on average than businesses in non-tribal areas. And of course, the final challenge is on financial literacy and personal financial management skills, which are critically important, especially for communities that face higher levels of financial fragility. As tribal nations are tackling these impediments, the Federal Reserve has a role to play as part of our broader mission to support financial inclusion. And I just wanted to give a few examples of how we are working with tribal communities. We're working first and foremost with the other banking agencies on reforms of the Community Reinvestment Act. Those reforms should improve financial inclusion and the availability of community development financing in underserved community. In doing so, we have, I think, a unique opportunity to design a regulation that better addresses the credit needs for Native communities and in Indian country. I want to highlight 2 of the proposals that we sought feedback on when we put out our advance notice of proposed rulemaking in September of 2020. One of them is very related to this issue of having very few bank branches. I visited the Pine Ridge Reservation 2 years ago, I think, and saw a very impressive mixed-use development on the Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. What was interesting on the list of donors were there were no banks, and that just speaks to the lack of bank branches in many of these communities. So what we need to do in CRA is to make sure that banks in any part of the country can receive credit for eligible CRA activities in Indian country even when there is not a branch nearby. We've also sought feedback on ways to encourage and reward banks for activities that are responsive to community needs in harder to serve areas. And so one approach that we've proposed and asked for feedback on is using impact scores for community development activities to ensure that performance evaluations would give that extra credit, reflecting the relative importance of loans and investments within underserved communities. Secondly, the Federal Reserve is actively supporting a robust community development financial institution ecosystem. Over the last 20 years, the number of native CDFIs increased fivefold. There are now over 70. While native CDFI loans tend to be small, they fill a critical gap for those who are credit invisible or have poor credit profiles, and they can also help improve their clients' credit and boost their financial access. Native CDFIs in Oklahoma have been very successful in providing financial access to Native Americans across the board: mortgage lending, small business growth, and economic development more generally. And of course, the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City has been very active working with Native CDFIs and Native MDIs in this district, in part through its Investment Connection program, which has helped to match CRA-eligible projects in underserved areas with banks who are looking for CRA-eligible activities. Third, we have an economic education team that is led out of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis by Megan Cruz, who's a citizen of the Osage Nation and who is here today, and in collaboration with the Federal Reserve Banks of Atlanta and Kansas City. And they are focused on providing tribal nations and Native communities here in Oklahoma across the country with personal finance and economic education programming that is tailored to local needs and reflects the diversity of Native languages and cultures. And finally, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis's Center for Indian Country Development collects data and conducts economic research and analysis to help fill those very critical data gaps that make it more difficult to target some of this economic support. Some of the statistics I cited came from the Center for Indian Country Development. They've certainly done a lot to make sure that there is a data tool on labor force participation and employment and unemployment for the American Indian and Alaskan Native population. And they have an upcoming inaugural research summit in collaboration with tribal leaders to continue that work program. So just to wrap up, in the districts with large Native American populations and stakeholders, our reserve banks are deeply engaged with Indian country. We welcome the diverse perspectives of Native Americans from serving on some of the Reserve Bank boards who are here today and more broadly, to joining us as full-time employees to make sure that we are better reflecting these perspectives. The CEO of Lakota Funds, which is a Native FDI, Tawny Brunch, is actually vice chair of the Federal Reserve Board's Community Advisory Council, which helps keep the board informed of perspectives from around the country. And today we are announcing that we're joining the Central Bank Network for Indigenous Inclusion alongside the Reserve Banks of New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. and we look forward to learning from our Indigenous partners and the central bank members of that network. So I just want to thank you. I look forward to hearing from you today and look forward to continuing this dialogue.
Thank you very much, Governor Brainard. I'm really excited that you could be here with us in Oklahoma. So to facilitate today's conversation, I will serve as your moderator for this panel. And I'll ask a series of questions, and as I direct a question to you, if you would first please introduce yourself and note your tribal nation affiliation, and then answer the question. I think our folks have asked us to try to keep time here, so I'll do my best. Please feel free to take your time, because this is an important conversation for us. So in the theme of talking about the recovery as we go through the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to start with you, Governor Anatubby, and talk about something that has emerged as a top issue, and that is inflation and prices. And more specifically, we would be interested in hearing how tribal communities are responding to higher prices of some items, whether it's gasoline or groceries, and how have changes in inflation since the start of the pandemic affected some of the business decisions that you see to spend and invest? So please.
Well, thank you, Madam President and Governor. We appreciate you coming to Oklahoma. I'm Bill Anatubby, Governor of the Chickasaw Nation, and we're a tribe that has about 73,000 people now. And they're all across the United States, but we have a good number of people in Oklahoma. About 2/3 of those people live in Oklahoma. We're government first. We have 3 departments of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. And of course, the executive is the governor and the lieutenant governor, and then about 13,000 employees of that department. Then we have a legislative department made up of 13 legislators, and they're elected from 4 different districts within the Chickasaw Nation. Then we have a Supreme Court and 3 justices, and we have lower courts, district courts. When it comes to the pandemic and the effect that it's had on our people and on us, it could have been very devastating if it weren't for some of the measures that the tribal government took to help deal with those issues. On March the 17th, we declared a public health emergency. It was right on the heels of other governments doing the same. And we didn't know a lot about the virus, just what we could learn and what CDC was putting out. We felt it was better for us to close the doors, except for some essential services, and send our employees home. Now that could have been devastating to them, but we set up a special leave program for COVID-19, which allowed them to continue to be paid during the time that they were at home. We classified some as work from home or work off-site because they could utilize their computers, and we could use our systems for them to work from home. We had some people that they would have to be on site to work, and they were the ones that either they were classified on leave, or well, they were all on leave, but they were given special situations where they were either able to come back and forth to the office, or some who were compromised, their health was compromised, we did not expect them to come into the office. But what kept them from being very much affected by this was the fact that we were able to continue paying them. At the same time that we closed the doors on the for the various offices that we have. We also had a number of businesses that had to close. And we relied mainly on those businesses for the revenue to fund the programs and services and cost of government. So that cut deep into our revenue sources. However, we had several capital projects that we were in the process of beginning or getting ready to begin that we put on hold, and we're able to utilize those funds in order to pay our people. The businesses were closed from March 17th until, March 16th until May 27th. So there was a large loss of revenue during that period. So the tribal government, while we lost that revenue, we're still able to continue to operate, even though it was minimally in many cases. And we set about immediately to have a plan to reopen. And we looked at all of our budgets, and there was all the departments, because they did reduce their workload, they were able to reduce the costs of operations. Combined with all those things, plus a very generous federal government when it came to the CARES Act, those dollars were able to use those dollars for the setting up new programs and doing things that we may not have been able to do otherwise. The effect on our people was generally the same as it was on the tribe. There were many people that, because of COVID, there were doors closed to businesses. There were the school systems closed, and many people were sent home, and a lot of those folks were not paid. So it created a real economic problem within our communities. The CARES Act funding provided really it was a blessing for us. We were able to not only use the funding that we had for our from regular source, from our general fund, but we're able to also establish programs using the CARES Act. And so some of the things that we did, we have what we call a citizen support program that we established, and we would utilize these funds to help people make up the difference between what they may receive in wages or salaries, or in order to continue to keep their household together. And in some cases, we're able to, where they had children in the home and the schools began to go to the virtual learning, we were able to equip them with the school systems use the Chromebook, so we were able to purchase Chromebooks for these students, and we're able to help them get set up on the internet if they did not have it, so that the children could still participate in their schoolwork. All these negative impacts, and I could go into many, many more, but we had to close our child care systems too that we operate. So that created a real problem. But we're able to stabilize some of these things, primarily because of the funding that we already had in place and the funding that we got from the CARES Act. The cost of living obviously went up at the same time, and then you have like people who are on fixed income who were maybe they're elders who receive a Social Security check, and they have to make a choice as to whether they're going to buy groceries or that they're going to pay some other bill. And so that made it very difficult for them. So we were able to continue our Senior Citizens Program, which provided food to our senior citizens. And we also extended to other people in the communities a food program that would help them with their necessities when it came to food. They couldn't get PPE. I mean, it was scarce. So we were able to acquire PPE, and they were able to use the PPE, and they didn't have, that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And the various programs that we had helped them get necessities that they needed, help pay their utility bills if they didn't have the funding for that, and help them if they were renters to help pay for their rent. So there were numerous programs that we put together that were intended to support the people in the community so that the impact of the pandemic would be less on them. It was, in fact, very difficult for many, many people within our communities. And I'm sure that there were a lot of people that were non-Indians that were affected the same way. But we had the resources to go to work and help these folks, so we utilized those resources and those programs. As far as the tribe is concerned, when it comes to the tribal government, the cost of goods and services went up for us as well. And the fact that we did not continue on these construction programs really escalated the price later when we were able to get things started. So a lot of the costs of materials went up so high that it increased the cost of the buildings that we were constructing. And some of these it was a necessity for us to move forward with these buildings. And again, I could go on with much about what we've done and what has happened within our community. I think you can look at communities all across the country and you can see very similar circumstances. And there are people within those communities that maybe did not have the support that we have been giving our people. And so the effect on our communities, although it was very difficult for them, we're able to be there for them. So the inflation did affect our decisions. We did slow down a little bit on some of the construction projects. But I'm not saying everything's hunky-dory, you know. But what I am saying is that the programs that we already had in place and the money we got from the CARES Act really helped us get through. And the new money that we have now, the ARPA funding is helping us to do the very same thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor Anatobi. So, Chief Standing Bear, I wonder if you would address a similar question about how the issues around inflation and the price of things might have affected your tribe.
Yes, and thank you for this opportunity for the tribal leaders to visit with you. And thank everyone from the Federal Reserve that's come to this first, as I understand. My name is Jeffrey Standing Bear. I am Principal Chief of the Osage Nation. My Osage name is Jinga Kahika, which means the child chief. And that's I'm of the Bear Clan of my people. On March 20 of last year, 2020, I learned from my directors we had no meat for our children's programs or elder and other programs. And I said, let's find other suppliers. And we looked and looked, and in a matter of days, we found out that where we live in rural Oklahoma, we were at the end of the food supply chain anyway. And the meat processing plants were shutting down in Kansas, Texas, and wherever quickly. And so those meat processing plants, we bypassed the wholesalers. We were looking everywhere. And we found out that within days, the waiting time for meat processing was from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months to a year. And so within those days, we decided to build our own meat processing plant, which made sense because 4 years earlier, we had agreed to purchase 43,000 acres repurchase actually land that our people had lost over the years. And we have over 2,000 head of cattle and over 100 bison. But we could not use those in these programs. They have to be certified, et cetera, which is a process. So we got to work with what funds we had available. And we are a government, and we convened our legislature, and we all worked together to build not only this meat processing plant, but go from where we were, from small hoop houses and small agriculture, to large greenhouses. We could not get fresh vegetables or fruits. We were actually running out of food, quality food, right off the bat. And the stores were, shelves were becoming empty. You may remember, a lot of goods were just simply not there. So we were in a race, and we all agreed that we had to work every day, day and night. Let's go. Let's get going. We have a common plan, and we're going to do it. We were working with each other, and then found out that the federal government was serious about the CARES Act. And when that came out, and when our staff worked with what we would be able to receive, the employees, we had a group of employees I appointed, next generation, just good young people that are Osage, and they're probably 40 and under. And they took what we had been working on, all of us been working on, and just mushroomed it with that CARES Act money. So we were able to immediately, we'd already started. And so they did a smart thing. Let's go ahead and put the money in what we were already doing. And so we increased the size of everything, got first-rate engineers, construction company, had declared an emergency, of course, like the other leaders here had done. So we had to shortcut a lot of things and still be accountable, of course, for what we were doing. And they found some of the people in this industry who knew what they were doing. Got the guy that's running it right now, in fact, out of retirement. He used to run a big processing plant up near Miami, Oklahoma. Then the greenhouse, we put a 20,000 square foot state-of-the-art greenhouse to put together, and then we have a 24,000 square foot plant processing, food processing, and then they put in an aquaponics farm. I'm learning all about this. It's amazing. Tilapia and other fish, and we can get like 6,000 pounds of fish out of there, and then and grow 12 months out of the year. And right now, I can tell you, we're out of our ranch, and anybody who wants to custom cut, we're up to 60 head a month of cattle or bison, and we're going to be at 80 soon. And our people are learning this new skill. But we took that CARES Act money and put it in there, and it just took off. Now, what we learned is that we have a long way to go, and partnerships are available through the USDA, through Oklahoma State University, Kansas State University, University of Kansas, University of Missouri. And as we pushed through, we started seeing people like University of Arkansas with their law school with food codes. And you know, who would know it, right? They have developed model food codes for tribes. And so all these resources start appearing as you push into these areas out of, in our case, immediate need. You see that other people are already doing this, the future thinkers. So we were catching up with them. And so we were taking their work, going to our legislature and passing the food codes and the regulations and getting that ready to build a system. And they were telling me this is called food sovereignty, and it's food security. Now, we also learned that so many of our people live in other places, we cannot cover everyone. So we ended up taking some of this CARES Act money, and like the ARPA money, and sending it out as stimulus payments to our people. Because now, I can tell you, with the increases in food and gasoline, so many of our people drive to Tulsa or other cities, and that's, their gasoline bills doubled here, and it looks like it's going to be expensive for the next couple of years, and after that it could get worse, I've been told. We are doing, like many tribes, a $2,000, up to $2,000 per member, if you can show it is a COVID response. And everybody's doing it differently. We have, you show food price increase, you show this and that, and then I have them get it notarized. It's been really good, but it's taken. We've set aside a third of our ARPA money for that, and I was told by my staff here as we started. I asked them earlier. We're up to 1/2 of our people have been. The checks have gone out to them. And this is 8 weeks. We started that program 8 weeks ago. So fully 1/2 of the Osage people have already applied and are receiving the checks. And but it looks like we're going to end up getting close to that amount of almost 1/3 of the ARPA money, which we could use for other areas. But they have to have this money individually because of the skyrocketing prices as a result of this COVID. So you only have so much. You got to balance all these priorities, of course, like we all do. And what we wanted to do with the CARES Act money, and what we are going to do, is a primary residential treatment program. We have found that the existing the existing stresses in our area on people, and our PhDs have shown us studies where our life expectancy for our people in where I live, in Muscoe, Oklahoma, is 10 years less for a similar Osage in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 60 miles away. I mean, you're just going to have 10 years cut off of your life, according to these surveys. And I can give you a whole reasons why. One of those issues is drugs and alcohol. There's sugar-based diseases like diabetes, and we're tackling that. But we're sending all of our people to Texas, Missouri, other states, because there's just simply not enough facilities, and there are family after family after family after family affected one way or another. And you got to have professional help. We can't, as non-professionals, take on these issues and try to struggle through. We got to have professionals, no matter how much you love your children, or your brother, your sister, your father. You got to have professionals. So that's what we got to do. But in the meantime, because the economy is doing what it's doing, 5% increase or whatever that may be right now, and with more on the way, that inflation increase, I don't call it inflation, those pressures are taking away from the programs that we have an immediate need for. And like all the tribal leaders, I can give you a lot of examples. So there's that.
Thank you for that perspective, Chief Standing Bear. So I'm going to turn to another topic related to education and labor markets in this post-pandemic economy. And I want to turn to Chief Hoskin and ask you to please introduce yourself, but maybe talk about some of the challenges with universities, community colleges, vocational institutions, and where they should help you in terms of focusing on your citizens and what they need during this time.
Well, thank you, and Madam President, Governor, thank you, fellow leaders. Pleasure to be with you. First Americans Museum, thank you for hosting. I appreciate the question. It's a topic that concerns all tribal leaders. On one sad note, before I came into the event, I learned that former Congressman Dale Kildee passed away, and he was a great champion for Indian country of so many of these issues. So we certainly mourn his loss and want to remember him. With respect to education, job training, making sure tribal economies can stay where they need to be, which is really at the top. We have that potential. And let me tell you about Cherokee Nation, and I know this is reflected in so many of the tribal lands in Oklahoma. We're really leading the way when it comes to education, job training, and economic development. If you look at Cherokee Nation, we're the largest tribe by population in the country. Our economic impact is significant in our region of northeast Oklahoma, about a $2 billion annual impact. We employ about 11,000 people. That's worldwide, but a significant number in northeast Oklahoma. Our employment, our businesses, and our government programs create internal opportunities for our people to get into the workforce, to get training, and to get careers that in turn help the local economy. But the additional efforts we make in education and job training, career readiness are significant too, and they are needed. And if you look at higher education in this country, Native Americans are lagging behind in terms of access to higher education, participation in higher education, and significantly retention rates. Do they finish what they begin? And that is a great challenge for a lot of populations in this country, but certainly true in Indian country. So right now we represent about 1% of undergraduates in this country, about 1% of graduate admissions. So one of the challenges is making sure that we've got great and strong partnerships with colleges and universities in terms of recruitment. Native American communities need to see that higher education is possible. They won't see that if it's not in their communities. It's not enough for the university that seems like not a long distance away in an urban area to be available. We need to be in Native communities. Often this means rural communities. Often this means doing what Oklahoma State University, by the way, does, which is reach out to the rural areas and try to inspire young people to get into the healthcare fields. We try to partner with them to make sure that we have an opportunity to inspire our people, our young people, to get into the medical field. So those are things that we can do in terms of recruitment. But the other challenge is this: we're in a state in which tuition and fees in colleges and universities have gone up about 30% over the last decade. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, we're in a state that for a decade retreated from funding higher education. Now, what did that do to the burdens of paying for college? They didn't go away simply because the state funding contracted or didn't keep up with the cost. What happened is it shifted on to students. If it shifts on to students in terms of tuition and fees, that means it's more burdensome on those who are at the lower income scales. And it turns out that Native students tend to be on the lower income scale. So the burden of taking on college debt, which is a problem for this country, becomes a particular problem for young Native students who do make it through, but they have to make perhaps career choices that are driven by the debt that they have, or after they get out of college, they're burdened by that debt, and it constrains the other things that people want to do with their lives in terms of being productive members of a community, returning those dollars back locally rather than sending them off to pay the student debt. So that's a challenge for the country, but it's particularly difficult, I think, for Native peoples. Now, at Cherokee Nation, here's what we're doing. We have contributed a great deal of our resources into higher education, and we do it in the form of scholarships. So last year, we spent about $16 million on college scholarships. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 Cherokees are going to school on a Cherokee Nation college scholarship. Now that's helpful, but it doesn't really address the problem that we have in this country with really skyrocketing costs. What do we do about student debt? But we are doing something with our own dollars to help our own students. And there's other things we can do. I mentioned recruitment, I mentioned college debt. What we can do to help young people be college ready is important, and that's sometimes a complicated discussion, but part of it is as simple as making sure the kind of ACT and SAT preps that many people in this country have easily at hand are available to Native students where they live. Make sure that's possible. We have a Cherokee Nation Foundation that does a good job of making those opportunities available, but it's not accessible to every Native in this country, and it needs to be, and because that is part of creating a pipeline of students that are ready to go to college. Here's another issue, and this expands beyond college certainly, but if you have areas in which connectivity, in which broadband is not available, you are cut off from so much of the world, and you could talk all day. We could have a whole forum about what that means in terms of getting a foothold in the economy, being able to access medical care, but it makes a difference in whether you're college ready, and it increasingly makes a difference in to whether you can go to college, because what we've seen in the last year is that schools have shifted to a virtual format, and I think many schools will continue to do that because that is a way to learn, but if you have populations that lack broadband, then you're going to really restrain their ability to take place in what is the modern education system. At Cherokee Nation, we're investing in that. Now, in Oklahoma, there is great challenges in terms of addressing broadband gaps, and we see a lot of that on our reservation. So we're putting our own dollars into it. We're trying to access dollars through the FCC and opportunities through the FCC and other channels. We're committing some of our ARPA dollars to going into communities that, frankly, the rest of the world forgot about, but we haven't forgot about them. And so we're making sure we bring opportunities for Wi-Fi hotspots into those areas, building cell towers if we need to attract companies to get cell service. You can imagine a community without cell service. It doesn't seem possible today. It happens in this country, and it happens in Indian country, and that impacts whether someone sees a world in which they can get higher education. And it also impacts whether they see an opportunity to come back home with that higher education, put that learning to use for their community, because that's what Native peoples want to do. If we can, we want to come back and serve our people, and opportunities to do that are driven in part by higher education. Let me speak briefly about what is another important way that our people can get that foothold in the economy, which is career readiness outside of college. I'm a big believer in that. I'm a product of a college degree, and it served me well, but it's not for everyone. And what we really ought to look at in tribal economies is where are the jobs today, where are the jobs in the future, and what kind of pipelines do we need to create to make sure Native peoples are ready to take those jobs. College, it may be part of that. It certainly is part of that. I mean, we're a tribe that brought the first med school to Indian country to Tahlequah, Oklahoma. But we also need to remember that many of our people can work in the trades, they can work in technical fields, they can work in fields that are very rigorous in terms of intellect and skills, but they're not necessarily college degree programs. And so what we did a couple of years ago was we doubled what we spent on career readiness programs, not college programs, career readiness programs, so that young people who want to take that path into VOTEC, into trade schools, into technical schools, learning IT, learning health fields that are so important and so in demand, can access those. And we're taking some of those ARPA dollars and we're actually going to increase even more what we're doing. I think we need to do more of that in this country, and I think in Indian country it's particularly helpful, but I think we have to assess what the needs of the tribal economies are, and they vary. Tribes are not a monolith. What is important in one part of Indian country may not make sense in another, but I think that it's going to take resources. It's going to take a commitment to making sure young Natives are ready for a career from a young age all the way through, whether it's college or career training. So we're doing that at the Cherokee Nation. I think if this country wants to live up to its commitment to Indian country, there is not a better way to do it than to help us invest in higher education, address some of these areas I've mentioned, and help us address career training programs. That's what this country could do to help keep its promise to the tribes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chief Hoskin. Chief Hill, if I could turn to you, please introduce yourself, but continue this theme of labor market and education and how important that is to your tribe.
Again, thank you very much for allowing us to be here and for the invitation. My name is David Hill, Principal Chief of Muscoe Creek Nation, and thank you all for the attendance. Much like the other tribal leaders here, we all suffered through the same thing through the pandemic. And I have to echo a lot of what Chief Hoskin had mentioned on the education side and the labor. You know, the need of the labor market has been shifting for years with automation and computerization as least aspect of nearly every job. The worldwide demand for the isolation during the pandemic accelerated this trend by rapidly expanding the range of the services that are delivered remotely or without contact. Just not having that in person definitely affected everything. From business meeting to visits, you know, with the doctor, much of life went online in the last year. I'm a victim of that. You know, having been tested positive, having a COVID, I was in the hospital probably 15 to 20 days, and just having my doctor there on the monitor, you know, and that's, and you know, that was just a way of life last year for everyone. And, you know, workers will need to adapt into using all this, maintaining and improving these technologies. But another important skill workers will need to learn is how to deliver these services with the same emphasis on convenience, customer service, and quality as they would have in person. You know, no customer or not customer, consumer or citizens wants to feel like a statistics, you know. But not all problems are new problems. There are many well-paying jobs in industries that were experiencing a chronic shortage of workers, even before the pandemic. Welders, mechanics, and other skilled labor workers remain in high demand. These positions are essential to economic, I can't even speak now, recovery and stable growth, because when leaders envision buildings back better, these are people that do the actual building. Just as Chief Hoskin had mentioned, not everyone want to go to college. You know, I myself got married at 16, still married, going on 41 years. I went into the oil field, went into the aerospace, 30 years. It's more than technical. So on the technical side, I have a lot of great communication with OSU IT in Okmulgee, Green Country, in the several, the one in Wetumpka. We have that working relationship. What can we do with the pandemic? The nurses, the construction, plumbers, electrician is what we're trying to focus on. A lot of what's going on within Creek Nation. You know, the Muscoe Creek Nation is always striving to provide and collaborate with Educational Institute to recruit and train people for these positions as students also prepare for the new digital economy. So, you know, just as I had mentioned, I've been in aerospace 30 years, so I think everyone knows my background, so once they come to me, you know, they focus on aerospace. So we've had at least 3 aerospace companies come visit, want to work with Creek Nation, and those are some of the areas that we've seen, and just like Chief had mentioned, Muscoe Creek Nation Reservation is split right there south of I-40. So the reception is not real good. So broadband is another one that we're working with as a joint. We have a lot of reservation land or restricted land that we have that we're also going to work at building towers. So we can also generate revenue for that. Having the construction workers train the citizens to work with them as well before and after. So there's that definitely affected a lot of the education side on the rural areas. Growing up traditional, as I did, that both families are working. So who's there teaching the kids? And we noticed that throughout this pandemic that we definitely need to help. We provided laptops, hotspots for all the students at Creek Nation, and also provided all the PPE equipment or the items to all the school districts. We have 65 school districts within our reservation. So, you know, with the pandemic, it definitely affected everything we do. As is this, you know, everyone had to sit 6 foot away. I'm a in-person type person to meet, you know. It's totally different the way we conducted business last year. Everything was virtual, just having a meeting. I know several meetings I had with Megan, it was, you know, everything was virtual. Have 200 people online, and just not having that interaction definitely affected everyone. But I always tease, I know Chief Batten always teased me when we have our intertribal meeting, and that's one thing I will say, meeting with Chief Hoskin, Governor Anatobi, Chief Batten, and former Chief Semino, Chief Chilcote. We always have our intertribal meeting where we can share ideas of each one. What can we do better, or just get the different ideas from each and every one. Chief Batten always told me I was a guinea pig from what happened last year, you know, and I told him and Governor Anatobi, you know, y'all didn't tell me this was on the front page or was it fine print, you know, as being elected, being sworn in January 4th, and March came, and with the pandemic, with the Supreme Court ruling, and with the CARES funding, everything hit last year in 2020. But, you know, that was, we went through challenges, but we, that's how you grow with challenges. And it was, and I don't want to say it's difficult, but it was a challenging year, but we went through all we could, and it's been a success, you know, and we're still providing, as mentioned as a labor, a lot of the, we was able to build during the CARES funding. And that's going to be part on the economic side, was a safe space that we built to house 64 employees, still provide the services to the citizens, still can, following the guidelines where they can come in and leave, staying 6 foot apart. Also built a warehouse to store all of our PPE storage items that we have, as well as Chief Standenberg had mentioned, meat processing plant. So all the buildings we were able to build new buildings that still provided labor workers. So, you know, that's from the plumbing, electrician, IT. So we were still able to provide all that in Okmulgee, you know. So thank you.
Thank you for that perspective, Chief Hill. So I'm going to shift to another question, maybe about overall economic impacts of COVID. And Chairman Barrett, I'm going to turn to you on your perspectives on how your tribal community has been affected, maybe still, and what you see lying ahead. So please introduce yourself, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Governor Brainard and President George, for the honor of being here, and I'm grateful to the other tribal leaders to hear your perspective. I'm John Rocky Barrett. I'm tribal chairman of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. I was recently elected in June to my 10th term, 4-year term of office. So I have been there 40 years, and I had a term or two as vice chairman before that. So I've been at this for some time. So assessing confidence is one of those things that's hard to do in a changing world, especially the changes that we've been through in the last since the pandemic started, and what's going on in the political world. Confidence is really boiled down to assessing risk more than confidence. It's I don't know anyone that can say with any degree of certainty that they're confident. It depends on what hat I have on. I guess if I have my banker's hat on, we operate the largest tribally owned national banking chain in the country, and we've had a extremely good last few years. From a lender's standpoint, because of lower interest rates and available capital, our confidence is extremely high that from a banking standpoint, we're going to continue to grow and prosper, and that we're going to be able to provide additional services. But as the manager of tribal assets and operations for a very long time, we have a great deal of concern. I guess I'm kind of like the old bull rider that at the rodeo. You know, I get on the bull, but I'm certain I know how to ride it, but I'm not real sure how much risk I'm taking here while I'm doing this. We have constant concern about inflation and prices. We've begun a number of projects in our industrial park that we've gotten right down to the wire on signing major blue chip prospects, and then only to see the prices of steel and the prices of the buildings and the prices of the equipment and the raw materials triple and quadruple and even become not available at all. We were able to get through the pandemic with some degree of certainty, because we operate a large chain of grocery stores and wholesale grocery operations. So we were able to provide locally for our people with food, and we were able to, when we shut down operations for well over a month, we were able to keep our 2 months. We were able to keep all of our people on payroll because we simply could not afford to lose them. We really didn't have a lot of choice in doing that, because even then we had 100 or so vacancies, and we have about 200 vacancies now that we have been advertising for these openings for literally months, and having job fairs and interviews, and we still can't fill those jobs. The availability of gasoline and groceries, those things are coming down the pike now, but what we're seeing is a lack of skilled and unskilled labor. Our truck drivers, our concrete company, every time that a driver stops at a stop sign, somebody walks up to the window and taps on it and tries to hire him away. It's become exceedingly hard to get drivers. The CARES program that we normally give away for holidays, we give away around 2,000 hams and turkeys. We were informed by our suppliers this year that they would be willing to supply the normal level of sales for our grocery stores, but they were not going to be able to provide an extra 2,000 turkeys or hams for our holiday giveaway. They simply weren't available. They did not have them to provide at any price for us. So that's a concern, and that lowers our level of confidence about how we're going to recover from this pandemic. We probably in Pottawatomie County, which is about 50 to 55,000 people in the county, and our reservation area is the lower half of Pottawatomie County. It's quite small compared to the rest of the reservation areas of my companions here on the panel, and it's the poor half of Pottawatomie County. But we probably don't have 10 houses that are for sale in that area. The demand for housing is extremely high, but as soon as as they break ground and pour the footings, someone buys it. They're just simply not there, and the materials to build them there. And to be absolutely truthful, I had a meeting earlier today with Senator James Lankford and the mayor of Shawnee and the several leaders in the community. We met for lunch today and talked about what what was in the future for Shawnee, and there was a great deal of concern and some political angst and envisioning risk about the uncertain political environment that we face, especially Indian tribes in Oklahoma face an adversarial political environment. We have a high degree of dependence on gaming revenues, and we have a constant challenge from the governor of the state on the compacts that have been in effect for so many years that were just renewed, and we went through quite a battle in getting that done. So there is a perceived risk, I think, of everyone in the tribe about and in the community about what's going to happen with all of these shortages and where things are going to go with our regulatory environment. I would say that the economic confidence, other than availability of loans, the economic confidence is not as high as I would like to see it. And there's generally a lot of confidence. People's attitudes have changed. We were talking today. Why do we have 200 people short on our payroll? We normally have 2,400 people or so on our payroll, and we asked why we were short 200 or more, and why we couldn't fill those jobs, and why we have people in their 40s and 50s that have chosen to leave the workforce. And it's because I think people are, there's a military term that when you say you're short, it means that I only have a short time to before I finish my tour of duty. Or if you're, in this case, the people are wondering whether or not there's going to be another form of COVID come along that's even more virulent. So people are starting to get a little less confident simply because they're short. They're worried about whether or not they're going to have a retirement age, whether they're going to have that time with their families. We've lost a number of key people in our tribe to COVID, and we have gone through a great deal of agony in our workforce over vaccinations. And I want to congratulate Chief Hoskins on the way he handled it. The problem that we have is that we can't seem to get past a critical mass point with our vaccinations because people are believing falsehoods. They're getting all their information from Facebook rather than from authorities. So there is that degree and all of those things that are happening. We had an awful lot of confidence when the Hearth Act passed. We were the first tribe to sign the Hearth Act. And the Hearth Act was designed to allow us to have mortgages for housing purposes on federal trust land that was secured by leaseholds, long-term leaseholds. And what we discovered was that you can write all the leasehold mortgages you want, but there's no secondary market for them. You have to be willing to hold them. And what I would love to see is some leadership on the part of the Federal Reserve to influence the federal government into making leasehold mortgages that, even if we have to provide secondary guarantees from the tribe or some other form of guarantee, put those in the guaranteed pool with the Veterans Administration loans and FHA loans. Because if we can't create a secondary market for those mortgages, it's never going to happen. And we really had high hopes for the Hearth Act. We were able to do some commercial Hearth Act loans and secure them with leasehold mortgages. And there's good you know, there's good experience for that. I mean, the city of Boston's been doing that for what, 400 years or so. So we see commercial is easy to do, but households are another difference, because that's all depends on the secondary market. So we'd like, that would restore a great deal of confidence, I think, to the housing market for those of our membership that are adjacent to or available for to live on Indian trust land. The CARES Act and ARPA have been a tremendous asset to us. They have, we've begun a number of economic development projects with it. We've been able to send out direct stimulus checks to our people, and that has raised their level of confidence. Unfortunately, it's also raised their level of expectations. There is, you know, when's my next check coming is going on, as I'm sure all of you are experiencing some of that too, because it's kind of like feeding cookies to the bears, you know. But when you run out of cookies, there's a dilemma that you face. So, but I would say that the economic confidence could be restored, but it's going to take a considerable amount of focused effort to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett, for those insights. Let me turn to you, Governor Wasana, and just along the same lines, how is your tribal community experiencing the recovery, and what issues do you see? Please introduce yourself too.
I'm Governor Reggie Wasson with the Cheyenne Arapaho Tribes. I just want to say thank you, President George and Governor Brainard, for allowing me to sit here today before such our distinguished guest. You know, I personally didn't think I'd be here today talking about the pandemic. I think, like most tribal leaders, we thought it was a 60, 90-day, 6-month thing, and it's evolved into a variant and other things. So a little bit about our tribe. We are located about 45 minutes west of here, north of El Reno, Oklahoma, a place called Concho. We got about 2,500 acres there. We got about 13,000 tribal members. About 5,400 live within our service area. There's about 9,400 that live in the state of Oklahoma. We got about 2,500 people that are 55 years of age and older that we call our elders. And part of the population between 18 and 54, 60% of them, those are 60% of who our tribe is. We have still culturally rich. We still have our sun dances. We still have all of our traditions. We still have all those things that a lot of the kids and elders and people look forward to. I always feel that we're a traditionally rich tribe. We may not ever had much, but we kind of always had each other. So that always inspired us. So as this pandemic hit, it's kind of like a tornado coming. You don't know if it's going to get you or not. It keeps coming and coming, and sometimes it'll devastate you, sometimes it'll miss you, but I think we've all been devastated. And one of the first things that happened early on is we lost a tribal member, first tribal member. So everybody got concerned and scared. So we created a health task force. We got a really smart individual, an epidemiologist from OU to head it. We got health professionals on there. We had our health board. We had our health department, and we partnered with the IHS Clinton Service Unit to help us, give us any information that we could get to help us navigate through this pandemic. And we tried our best. We got with our casinos. We looked at who was distributing food, because Walmart was running out of toilet paper. They were running out of beef. They were running out of everything. So that word, food security, none of us ever thought of, and that's what we were trying to do. So we were expending our funds. We shut down our casinos. People were unemployed. We paid everybody their wages. We paid everybody their health benefits, although we were closed, to make sure that our families were safe and secured. We shut all our buildings down, and we canceled all of our cultural events, our ceremonies. And it was a very rough time for our tribe because we were social people. And we don't get to go out and say hi, hug, or see grandma and grandpa or touch, because this created not only depression but anxiety. And when you get to go out and you get to maintain your freedom, it's hard when you start doing shelter in place, social distancing, masking, all these things that were required. Put sanitizers on your hand. As you walk in here, you first think, do I wear a mask? Do I got a mask? You look at that handle. Do I touch that handle? You look at who you're talking to. Could they be infected? Do they have a mask on? Even as you walk around the building, everything you do is mental, and it starts to get to you. Because before we could walk, go anywhere, touch anybody, high five anybody, see anybody, touch anything. Now we're so built in that what are we going to do when we see somebody, when we talk to somebody, when we touch something, when we go into a restaurant? If you think about it, you're thinking our whole attitude, our whole outlook has changed. And sometimes as we met every day in a room with our health officials, our task force, our legislators, myself, I'm the governor, lieutenant governor, and these people who would advise us, sometimes it would get testy. And you could feel the tension, and that tension was caused by the stress and anxiety and the depression that everybody had to go through because their kids were sitting at home. They couldn't get nothing at the restaurants. They couldn't get anything in the stores. All our lives were disrupted, overturned. And regardless of your race, when you're doing something normal every single day and it's disrupted, not only for 90 days, 120 days, but we're going into 2 years, people get on each other's nerves, so to speak. And we did, and I could feel it in rooms. And I said, okay, let's stop, because we're starting to get a little bit anxiety and testy with ourselves. And I said, this is all due to COVID. We're all have a strain, and as tribal leaders, it was very strenuous until the CARES money came about, the ARPA money. So when we started having people pass away from this, we had employees pass away, casino employees. I remember one casino employee, we were building a brand new casino in Watonga, Oklahoma, with a hotel and in a conference center. He was one of our technicians, and they were pulling wire. A day or two after that, he goes home. He gets COVID, test positive COVID. Within a week to 10 days, he died. And I thought, could it have happened with the others? Because we had construction workers, whole crews having to go home under quarantine. And we had departments that went home under quarantine. We stayed open, tried to maintain the services to our tribal members, but we were all affected. It affected the services, it affected our tribal members, it affected how we deliver service. We had to cancel our transportation system. We had to watch our health officials. Our paramedic, one of our paramedics died transporting somebody that got COVID. So we were trying to be cautious as possible. We have screeners at the front door. We have testing. We were getting tested regularly. We did everything we could to keep people alive. So in that case, we started getting food boxes, food cards. We sent them out to anybody across the country. We had reserved some money. Luckily, we did. So we were trying to assist with food, medical, any type of transportation, give them gas cards. The elders were locked in. They didn't go anywhere. And we did lose elderly grandparents who caught it from their grandchild. We lost two sets of grandparents that way. So we were under a lot of pressure. And when CARES came about, we decided we need to build these, what we call emergency response centers. We had everything in there. We had showers, laundry stations, we had kitchens, we had staging areas, huge halls for staging areas. We built 4 of those. We converted all of our community halls into ERCs. We built 2 food pantries. We did an EMT, a brand new EMT station. We bought a new ambulance, tried to get ambulances. We tried to connect all of our rural areas with our legislators. We got them vehicles to take food boxes out to them. Some of them traveled to Tulsa, some went to Texas. If it wasn't for CARES, I don't know how we would have managed. We even gave assistance through an application process. Through CARES, we gave an assistance application process through our ARPA funds. We gave out over $50 million in a year for assistance so that people could still maintain their lives and their livelihood. So we tried and did everything we could as far as just maintaining life. We lost tribal members transporting them to Kansas. We lost a tribal member in Muscoe, Oklahoma. We lost a tribal member in Tulsa to COVID. So it was on our doorstep, and we were fighting it like crazy. So when we talk about COVID, it's going to have an everlasting stain on all of our lives, on even the tribe as a whole, because we stopped dancing, stopped singing, stopped doing a lot of things that tribes are known for. So it was tough. Our lives have changed. It's still changed. The jobs, we have jobs, and for some reason, a lot of people, we've created a lot of jobs in the rural areas. We have a brand new hotel, casino, conference center. We just grand opening 2 weeks ago. We still have 30 jobs in a small town of 6,000 people where they need jobs. We still can't fill those jobs, and I can't tell you why, but I think a lot of people have fear that maybe they don't want to go back out in public. A lot of people have the anxiety, and a lot of people change careers. I think a lot of people have figured out that staying home isn't a bad thing, and maybe there is one job breadwinner at home that can provide all those needs, because I think people become homemakers again, and they want to be there with their kids because their kids were out of school. Maybe it's going to take us years to get back to where we were as that normal. This is a new normal. We didn't anticipate it. We didn't ask for it, but it's here. We had to deal with it, and you know, thank God for those CARES funds and those ARPA funds that we were able to assist our tribal members to keep maintaining their livelihood. But you know, I see the numbers coming down. I hope that's where we trend to. I hope we're able to go back to some civility with our own lives, but it's tough. Our tribal members know it. They quit visiting. We quit being social. Like I said, we closed everything down. Our culture ties, our ceremonies, and just things took a hit. We started this new technology that a lot of the older ones aren't used to, Zoom, all these things that when we're so used to visiting and talking to one another that stopped. So we are picking up that technology. We are trying to do broadband. We are doing a lot of good things technological. We're trying to go into a cloud-based technology system that building for business and things like that. So the tribe is expanding. We are growing. We're going to keep going, but we're very vigilant on what's going on around us. So our tribe has taken all the steps we could and approaches, and you know, we believe, as all Indian people do, we're going to get through this, and we're going to keep going. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor, for those insights, and I think we all share some of the anxiety that your tribe has experienced. So, Vice Chairman Henry, I want to turn to you for your thoughts on how things have recovered from the pandemic, so please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Kola, Kage Nika, Kage Wako. My name is Jim Pepper Henry. I'm Vice Chairman of the Kaw Nation, one of the smaller tribes in Oklahoma. The Kaw people are from what is now Kansas, Kaw short for Kanza or Kanza. We're very closely related to the Osage people. And I've been Vice Chairman now for a little bit more than a year. I got elected right in the middle of the pandemic and got thrown right into this. And certainly facing a lot of challenges. One of the biggest impacts that we've had, believe it or not, and us being a very small tribe, we have a very small cemetery, and we've run out of burial plots because of the increase in deaths, not only because of COVID, but because of COVID-related deaths for people not getting their checkups, not getting treatment, not getting early detection. And I think that's going to have a ripple effect now for several years, because people were afraid to go to the clinic, thinking they would get COVID by going to the clinic. And now we're going to see for the next several years, and we've had several more deaths recently of people that have other diseases that could have been treated if they'd gone to the clinic early enough, so including cancer and diabetes-related illnesses. So we've had to go out and purchase more land for our cemetery, and adding 6 more acres to our cemetery. And we're trying to get this land into trust as quickly as we can, and we'd like to see the trust process streamlined in cases like this, so we can get that land, so people can be buried on our land rather than on fee land. So that's something we're working on right now. I do want to say something here. All of these leaders here are my idols and my mentors, and I want to say something that we've done as Native peoples here. All of these tribal members, leaders here, have opened up our tribal clinics to vaccinate not only our own people, but to vaccinate the broader community, because we're not safe if everybody else isn't safe. And so I want to commend them, give them a round of applause for doing that. And they've taken great leadership within our community to make that happen, and even with testing as well. And living here in the Oklahoma City area, the only place I could get tested was at the Cherokee Nation at their clinic, and so they've done an incredible job there. We also are having difficulty in hiring people in our community. We have plenty of jobs available. One reason is people are it's still easier for them to stay at home. They get paid more for staying at home with the subsidies that are out there for unemployment. Those are ending now, but I think that's kept a lot of people from going back to work because they get paid more for staying at home. But another significant reason why people aren't going back to work, and I heard this at the tribal council meeting this last weekend, is that there's a lack of affordable daycare, child care, and what we're seeing happening is children aren't vaccinated, and they don't have a vaccine yet for kids under 12, and it's hard to keep child care workers employed because they're afraid of getting the virus being around kids that may be infected. Plus, we have to raise the salaries or wages for those workers to even want to come to work, and we're seeing that across the board with our other enterprises, that we're having to raise the wages to entice people to come back, and we all seem to be competing with each other. Where my tribe is located, it's in Kay County, and we have a lot of casinos and a lot of gaming enterprises in a very small area, and we're kind of poaching from each other, trying to up the ante on each other in terms of raising our wages within those gaming operations. And I do want to say something about broadband. And when the pandemic hit, we sent a lot of people home, asking them to work from home. Through the CARES Act, we were able to get people laptops and computers to work from home, but we didn't have the bandwidth for people to work from home. And we're in such a rural area, in one of the poorest counties in Oklahoma, in Kay County, that the big carriers aren't interested in, it's not economically feasible for them to come in and provide broadband. And so we're taking the initiative to purchase our own spectrum and create our own network within our service area so that we could provide those services to our tribal members. You talked about Zoom, trying to Zoom in, and even for tribal council meetings, we had difficulty getting the broadband to Zoom in and conduct our business. Our Constitution dates back to the 1960s, and our Constitution requires that we have our tribal council meetings in person on tribal land. So we were forced to come in during the pandemic and meet in a room together, which was just very dangerous at that time. So we're trying to get our Constitution changed, reform with our Constitution, so that we can, in an emergency like this, a pandemic, that we have other ways of communicating rather than trying to meet in person, because it was a bit of a risk for us. So that's some of the challenges that we have at the Kaw Nation. I also wear another hat. I'm the director and CEO of this institution, First Americans Museum, and I want to welcome all of you here. And we just opened a few weeks ago, right in the middle of a pandemic too, but appreciate all of you being here at First Americans Museum. We're happy to host. Thank you.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm really sorry that we have to bring it to a close. But before we adjourn, I want to just see, Governor Brainard, any last thoughts, anything you want to say in closing here?
No, it's just a phenomenal set of really creative responses to an incredibly difficult set of challenges. So it's really been interesting listening to the range of ways that you helped your communities grapple with these incredible challenges. So my congratulations to you for what sounds like an incredibly positive and creative set of responses.
Let me just thank each of you again. It is really an honor to have you here on the stage and for us to benefit from those insights. So whether it's our understanding of the economic data we see and the context you help put around that, or thinking about how our engagement in our communities needs to respond with the kinds of programs and other things we do. This has been very helpful to us. So thanks to each of you. We will continue these Fed Listens approaches in addition to our ongoing relationships with each one of you. So thank you so much for being here today. Thanks to all of you. We're adjourned.